Now let's keep the love going for our final storyteller, Nikki Bailey.
I had just finished what was probably the best meal I'd had that week. I mean, it was Tuesday, so it was the best meal I'd had so far. I tucked into an entire feast from Ollie's Chinese food diner right across the street from the Columbia University campus. It was greasy and noodly and chock full of cruciferous vegetables and mystery meats. I was sitting on my dorm room bed, feeling fat and happy and satisfied. I was deep into a binge watch of my favorite British comedy, The Vicar of Dibley. I was on my 12th or 13th episode, the one where Geraldine finally gets married, when I got a text from Mr. Big. I called him Mr. Big, like Carrie from Sex and the City called her man Mr. Big. My Mr. Big earned the name because he had an enormous head and torso poised on top of two stubby little legs. He had the body of Fred Flintstone and the face of Q-Tip from Tribe Called Quest. Actually, I gave him the name Mr. Big because he treated me the way Mr. Big treated Carrie. He'd call me when he wanted something, namely sex. He never showed any interest in having a long-term relationship except when to do so would get him what he wanted. I knew that's what was happening, but my self-esteem was low enough not to care. So I wasn't at all surprised to get a text from him asking, "You up?" Yeah, I know. It's the cliche "you up" text that we've all heard about. And he actually sent it. It said "you," the capital U, up, question mark. I rolled my eyes because I couldn't believe he'd actually sent that exact text. While I was, in fact, up, I wasn't sure if I was up for, stuff. Doing stuff, like sex stuff. I mean, I was really full. I'm remembering now that my brother used to complain whenever we ordered Chinese food. He'd say, "Nikki always blows up the bathroom after lo mein." But at the time, I didn't remember that, so I went ahead and responded with a thumbs up emoji, essentially inviting Mr. Big over. He said he'd be there in an hour. I did all the necessary preparations, and when the time came, buzzed Mr. Big up to my room. He was dressed for the occasion. I could tell that he went to great lengths to look good when he saw me because he was wearing his gray sweatpants, the ones that were not covered in paint. He was a painter and always walked around covered in paint as if to signal, "Artist, artist, artist!" The t-shirt he wore didn't have food stains on it and was actually clean. I felt so honored, and I thought in a haze of low expectations, he's trying. I had leftovers from dinner, but I didn't offer them to him. I had plans for those leftovers. Tomorrow I was going to binge watch Friends and supplement the rest of the meal with microwave nachos. I didn't want to share my grub, so I offered him a glass of water. He accepted. He took a couple sips, looked around my room, and full of charm and romance said, "So, do you want to fuck?" There was no point in pretending we were going to do anything else, so I said, "Sure." We started kissing. One thing led to another, and we did the deed. It was never anything better than just fine with him, and at that time in my life, fine was good enough. He had this annoying habit of telling me that he loved my body. He'd whisper it in my ear when the goodie got good to him. He'd lean in close and say, "I love your body." And every freaking time I heard him say, "I love you," I would think he's finally going to say it. He's going to tell me that he loves me. But he never did. Loving my body was as close to loving me as he would get. We fucked. The kind of fucking that feels good but doesn't necessarily get you there. He was a master of the stroke, but always stopped short of stroking me to orgasm. We were laying in the dark, so I guess it was easy to get personal and intimate and disclose vulnerable information. He did that from time to time. He'd be distant for weeks and then show up, fuck me, and tell me something deep about himself, something that made me feel privileged and lucky to know, the kind of information you only tell a girlfriend or someone that you really loved, like how he'd cry every time he watched West Side Story, or like The time he told me he'd been beaten bloody in a fight defending a woman he was dating. It made me feel like maybe he'd defend me too. I thought it meant I was special to him because he would confide these things in those moments of sacred soul connection when pillow talk intensified the intimacy that we shared. It was around this time that the Chinese food that I hadn't really had enough time to digest began to churn in my tummy. The Chinese food that I had so enjoyed wanted to join our oh-so-intimate tete-a-tete. I shifted position. I thought surely my stomach would settle. She'd realize that this is not the right moment to start to gurgle loudly. So we're laying there in the afterglow of adequate sex, and he starts telling me about this conversation he'd had with his dad before his father died. He confided in his father that he had a dream of being a film director, and his father thought he couldn't do it. His dad thought he was untalented and incapable, and Mr. Big told me how much that had hurt his feelings. He'd internalized that feeling, making it hard for him to overcome the things that his father had said. That, and of course, the white man keeping him down, or why he was still an unknown artist and underpaid cater waiter. He told me this story about his dad, and I didn't have anything to say, so we just laid there quietly. At some point, I thought he cried. I don't know, I felt for him. Gurgle, burble, churn. My tummy was rumbling its unwanted opinion again. I shifted, hoping that another change of position would alleviate the growing pressure in my now bloated belly. We lay in companionable silence, me hoping that he couldn't hear the riotous uproar of my dinner sloshing about. After a long, peaceful while, when I was sure that my tummy had chilled the fuck out, I opened up to him, too. I told him about my mother and how she'd never wanted me to pursue acting, how she forbade me from even auditioning for Performing Arts High and wouldn't let me major in theater in college. I told him of my Oscar-worthy dreams and my MFA hopes. He was so supportive. He told me that I needed to try. He said that he thought I was talented. He told me that I could get an MFA if that's what I really wanted. He said he believed in my abilities. He believed in my talent. He believed in me. I felt so seen. He had that ability. Sure, he would disappear for months, but when he did come around, he made me feel good about myself. He paid attention to me. He confided in me. He saw things in me that I sometimes had a hard time seeing in myself. And at the very least, he loved my body. And for a fat woman in America, having someone say they love my body was a buoy for my constantly sinking self-esteem. Groan. Oh no. My stomach was starting again. It roiled and rolled and threatened, but I thought I could stave it off. He almost never spent the entire night with me. Tonight, I was counting on his early departure. I figured he'd lay around and chat with me for a few hours and then leave like he always did. But we talked and talked into the night, and the longer we talked, the more my Chinese food wanted in on the conversation. My belly was beginning to interject. She was being quite rude about it, too. She'd agitate and bellyache and turn and squish around, and when I laughed, it was beginning to take effort not to let air out. Either he didn't notice or he pretended not to, but my tummy was making some pretty interesting noises. It was becoming clear that he was planning to spend the night. Would this be the night he finally professed his love? We'd been lying there for hours at this point, sharing secrets over gentle caresses and sensuous kisses. I'd have been content to lay there in his arms all weekend, hoping he'd love me body and soul if I could. Except I really, really, really had to fart. Like really, really, really bad. I had been holding it in for hours now, and the commentary from my Chinese food revolting in my stomach was getting louder and more aggressive the longer we laid there. At some point, I just knew I had to release. The inner tummy tension had built to a giant gas bubble, and I knew I had to let it go. I had to rip one, cut the cheese, break wind, fucking fart. My goal was to just release a little bit. Like when you first unscrew a bottle of soda, you let a little of the fizz escape so the soda doesn't overflow. I thought it would be a quiet, delicate thing, a quick little emission. I anticipated a cute, quiet that he wouldn't even notice. But instead of a cute, quick, airy discharge, what came out was long and rumbling and so stinky. And it sounded wet. It sounded like a death metal song, screamy and screechy and weirdly melodious in its noisiness and power. It rumbled out of me, stirring the covers as it rushed to release. And I, well, laughed. In fact, I could not stop laughing. It was the funniest thing I had ever heard or done or experienced in my entire life. I find farts hilarious. And this one was so good, so profound, so intense, that all I could do was guffaw. I thought he would laugh along with me. I thought everyone thinks farts are funny, and that he would find it funny too. But he didn't. No. Instead, he clamped his arms down tight over the covers to make sure that the farty air didn't leak up into his face. He went rigid, gritted his teeth, and growled, "That's not sexy, baby." Which honestly just made me laugh harder. Which just made me fart more. Which made me laugh harder. Which made me fart more. You see where this is going. I thought he was going to spend the night, but that was enough to scare him from my bed. And I was okay with it. A man who doesn't laugh at a fart is not a good man. To me, if you can't release wind with your partner, well, it's not a real relationship. And that was the day I realized that Mr. Big would always be Mr. Big. He'd never become real to me. He'd never become a person with a first name. He'd always be a mysterious character who came in and out of my life to fuck me and feed me his vulnerabilities. I never saw him again after that. The fart was a foot too far. I still love Chinese food. I order it whenever I get the chance. And it still makes me blow up the bathroom. Farts keep on farting into the future. And I'm happy to say that I share those farts with a wonderful and positive spouse who loves all of me, not just my body, but also my mind, heart, and soul. She supports my art and my farts and finds flatulence as funny as I do. I celebrate her burps and she glorifies my gas. We're a match made in digestive heaven. Thank you.
Everybody, Nikki Bailey. Nikki does the funnies all around LA, and you can check her out at the Van Nuys Elks Lodge Comedy Night on February 21st. Follow her on all socials at @NikkiBailey_. Nikki, come back up here real quick. Come back up here. It's also Nikki's birthday today. Everyone, if we could, 1, 2,